But really, another issue is the stiffness and tension on the two-handed backhand. So coaches don't teach the two-hander like Jimmy Connors or Chris Evert used to hit it. The two-hander, it hasn't changed as much in the last, like if you look at the way the forehand technique has evolved since, if you go decade by decade from the 70s, 80s, 90s to now, the forehand technique and like stances has those things have evolved tremendously. And you can see the way the technique has evolved, and we should teach that to young kids. Don't teach them the old way, teach them the new way. And then with the backhand, there's been a lot of evolution, but it's not as much as the forehand and not as dramatic. So in the backhand, the two-handed backhand, the main evolution has been like the lag and snap of the wrists, what the wrists are doing. If you have to look at it in high-speed video in slow motion, so you can see that the way the wrists are very relaxed and the way the wrists are basically flipping, as Rick Macy describes it. I'm a big Rick Macy fan, by the way. I studied with Rick, and I think he's fantastic. So he's a legend. And basically, the way the wrists have to be, they make like a little flip or like a little circle, little lag and snap, whatever you want to call it. That should be happening on the two-handed backhand. And again, I would probably say 90% of the kids that I see, that they are not using their wrist, for lack of a better way to describe it, properly. They're not generating very much topspin so they're not dropping the racket head at the right moment, and they're not making that little circle, that flip with the wrist on the two-handed backhand. And so the backhand looks tight, cramped, and not fluid, like lacking fluidity and lacking whip. So it looks kind of like, instead of getting a blur when they swing, the backhand looks sort of like you can see the outline of the racket and the arms working. My mentor in Spain, Luis Bruguera, would say it looks the same speed. Like the backhand, when they're hitting it, it's kind of like the same speed, rather than changing speeds and getting a good acceleration, a good buildup of speed and whip in the racket head. The racket head is kind of looks kind of like the same speed throughout the swing, or it's slow motion, but it comes from the stiffness, the stiffness of the arms. And that, to me, on the two-hander is the biggest problem that I see. You see a lot of two-handers, and there's a minority that should be one hand. And then if you see a good two-hander, some kids get it by chance or by good coaching, but most of the kids are super tight. The contact points are usually late and behind them. This relates to positioning. I would say on both the forehand and backhand, you see a lot of tension in the body, in the arms, because of coach. For some reason, we spend a lot more time teaching the swing than teaching the positioning. And so this is more like a general critique or criticism of American coaching, where you have a lot of players who they've been taking lots of lessons, and they have bad contact points. They're actually in a bad position relating to the ball, and then they're very stiff as they swing. That's a major problem. That's something they do very, very well in Spain. One of the things, they clean up the positioning very well in Spain, which is why they have a lot of good players, even at the lower level, at the broad base, the grassroots level. They have a lot of players who play well. And I would say in the U.S., like when you start, not at the high level, but when you start going down to the lower levels, like I mentioned, like JV or high school or lower level tournament players, that there's like a huge technical skills drop off. Like it's really bad. You drop off a cliff. And part of that is the movement, the technique of movement, the way the kids move. They don't receive the ball very well. So they spend a lot of time doing, practicing their stroke reproduction or repetition, but they're hitting the ball consistently late or behind them or too high or too low. They're not moving their feet well to receive the ball. And so that creates what I'm talking about. That's part of the problem with tension. It creates a lot of tension in the swing. So it's important to try to teach players to position well, like on the backhand or the forehand, so that they can swing more with more elasticity, more looseness, and that it will help them generate topspin and more effortless power rather than meeting the ball poorly, receiving the ball poorly, and then trying to hit it by forcing it with tension, by forcing it with tightness, and with trying. The word I use sometimes is muscling the ball. Like instead of trying to muscle the ball with bad contact points, you should try to be loose and fast and quick and whippy with the arms and the racket, but with better contact point, which will actually give you more power and better spin if you do that the right way. And just most kids have no clue what I just said is for 9 out of 10 kids whom I see, they're clueless to this concept, of moving better, swinging more loosely, and meeting the ball, receiving the ball in a better place in relationship to the body. Like they have no clue what I'm talking about. And I just think, I say to myself, well, how can this be? Like, how can so many players across the U.S. are being taught that? How can they be taught that way? I don't understand it. Closed stances and grounded shots. So this is related to the footwork, getting into the footwork and movement. Closed stances. For God's sake, guys, why do we teach only closed stances to young kids? So we have closed stance backhand, closed stance forehand. I mean, I have kids who've come to me, they've never learned an open stance. They've never learned a semi-open stance. They could be 12 or 13 years old, and for years the coach said to them, you gotta step into the ball and transfer your weight. Like if you go for a lesson and that's the crux of the lesson, like the heart of every lesson is step into the ball, transfer your weight. I mean, come on, you got there's a lot better teaching that can be done than just that, guys. That's pretty basic and really not that important anymore. The game is rotational. The game is becoming more and more airborne. The evolution of the tennis game has become more airborne, more rotational. I just wish coaches would acknowledge that.